Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. My name's Corby LaCroix, and the song you're hearing right now is called Great and Mighty One, available on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your music. But for now, here's your host and my friend, Aaron Conrad.
Great Redeemer, God of grace.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Unscripted from my studios here in Old Hilliard. Corby, thank you for the introduction on audio as always, and I'm excited about today, as this is going to be a really interesting conversation, I believe. Why don't you introduce yourself? Well, I want to let my guest introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this. So my name's Chris Zaluski, and I'm a documentary filmmaker, originally from Northeast Ohio, born and raised in the Canton, Ohio area, but now I've been living in North Carolina for, about half of my life, but now I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I'm a documentary filmmaker and also a professor at the Wake Forest University documentary film program.
And we'll just get a few things out of the way. You said 330, so you're from Northeastern Ohio, which
That's
we
right,
talked about here in the pregame. Anybody Northeastern Ohio, North Ohio, I'm a fan. And so that's very cool. I'm also a North Carolina fan, and Wake Forest is in that triangle. But it's all good, man. It's all love. It is all love, especially the week of Easter, man. It's all good.
Yeah, it has to be, right? I hear you. I mean, I guess I'm a Wake fan, but I mean, you know this, in Northeast Ohio, like, at least for me, college basketball wasn't a big deal as much as it is down here. I mean, it is a big, big deal down here. And so I guess if I had to say my allegiance for college basketball, it's Wake, but everything else is Ohio. So
there you go. Well, and honestly, that you just mentioned, you just nailed why I am a North Carolina fan, is because there's not like college basketball in North. God bless Cleveland State, and they try real hard. And but at the end of the day, that's why I'm a North Carolina fan. That's not why we're on today. It's just really not. So if you logged in for that, you're going to be disappointed in the rest, right?
Yeah, that's all you're getting.
So let me tell you this. I'm so intrigued by this. You have a documentary out, and it centers around, I believe, a mural that was painted. And I have to tell you, we live in Hilliard, Ohio, and we're like the mural capital of Ohio, I think. I don't know if that's an official title, but and then what a really funny story is they just built this basketball field house, and they painted a mural on a building right next to it, and there's one of the players looks just like my son, and so he's like, I don't know if that was intentional. I have no idea. But all I know is he's forever memorialized on this building. So whatever, we're going to claim it's him.
That's awesome.
But what I will say is that I watched many of these murals be painted. One specifically in what we call Old Hilliard, which is kind of our downtown region. And it is a fascinating process. And I love this interview because there's a story behind each one of those people in that picture. So why don't you just tell your story because I think it's so fascinating. So I'll kick it over to you, but just to give some groundwork as to what we have here in our very own city that many of the listeners are from. So let me just turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll give kind of a rundown of the film, but let me just say, I think there is something really powerful in seeing art in a public space and being able to connect with it.
Right.
And so just the story you just said about it, the basketball player looking like your son, I mean, I think it's something really cool about seeing yourself or somebody like yourself in a display of public art. And so that was, I think that's the power of murals and the power of public art. But this film follows the creation of a traditional fresco style mural. So, when I say fresco, a lot of people think of like the Sistine Chapel or the Last Supper by Da Vinci. It's a style of art that really isn't practiced all that much anymore. It's a big mural. It's 28 feet long, 12 feet high. I mean, It's a really big mural. But in traditional fresco art, the paint and the pigment is painted directly into wet lime plaster, and so the wall, the art literally becomes part of the wall. It doesn't sit on the surface like a oil painting or something like that. It actually becomes part of the wall, and that's. I'll talk more about that later. While that really attracted me to the project, but so the film follows the creation of this mural in the sanctuary of a small church outside of Asheville, North Carolina. It's in the western North Carolina mountains, if you're familiar with it, and instead of depicting a traditional religious scene, the film is depicting people in the Asheville community who are battling homelessness, addiction, mental illness. Many of them are currently homeless. A number of them are off the streets now. And so the film kind of weaves in the story of how this fresco is created, which was a 3-year process, with the stories of these individuals that are being depicted in the fresco. And so it was about a 3-year production process too. Really excited to talk about it, but it was a really cool project to work on.
I love documentaries. Like, we're inundated on Netflix with series and movies and all those things. I tend to, when I log into my Netflix, it says suggestions for you, and it's all documentaries because I think they're so powerful. They're people's stories, and that's what I love about this very platform that we're on today. It was never intended to be anything more. It just became what it is, and it's stories. And so I think as I was reviewing the beginning of the film and many of the things that I noted, that's what's so powerful here. This is story. Those people on the wall, just like my son on the side of that building, he has a story. Is that true? And I think that's what we see in the film. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not just the stories of these folks, but I mean, these are stories of people who, are on the margins of society too.
Right.
So these are people who usually their stories are not the ones that we hear.
Right.
And so I thought it was, from a filmmaking standpoint, I thought it was a really interesting thing to play with, the fact that you're taking those whose stories are not normally heard, and you're not just putting them in a painting, but you're putting them in a fresco that turns to stone.
Wow.
I mean, you're creating a permanence to these stories. And so I think it takes that idea of public art and seeing yourself in a way that you normally wouldn't see yourself, and it amplifies it. And so, yeah, it's a story. It's all. I mean, for me, I got into documentaries. I used to be a newspaper reporter, but it's always been about telling stories. And so, documentaries was kind of an evolution of what I love to do as a newspaper reporter. And I think that the fresco is in murals in general, in art in general, is another form of storytelling. And fortunately, this church where the fresco is painted in, the Haywood Street congregation, they feel the same way. I mean, I originally got connected to this story because of this woman I knew who was their director of communication, and her title at the church is lead storyteller.
Wow!
So I love that because it shows from the outset, that's the importance that this church places on stories and the power that they know that stories have. And so that's ultimately why they decided to embark in this fresco mural.
I think it's so important in a world of Kardashians and whatever else, like, whatever you think of the Kardashians. it's we're constantly inundated with the popular, the whoever society decides is worthy of our time is what goes into our social media feeds, and it's what goes into our everyday life. And I think if we all, if you have a mural in your city, take a minute and realize that there's other people out there that aren't the Kardashians that didn't get famous for nothing. Maybe they're not famous at all, but they have a story. I love the concept of this documentary. I really do, because we all have a story, and it's so powerful. I think you mentioned it, how you were drawn to this project. What does a documentary, so just so people understand, because I watch, I watch a lot of them. What goes into making a documentary? Like, did you live in the area and you just drove to work every day, or did you guys have to set up camp? How does making a documentary work?
Yeah, and it can look different depending on the production.
Right.
I mean, if you look at some of the bigger productions on Netflix and places like that, I mean, those can be crews of, 10, 15, 20 people in the same way that you would see it for a traditional, fiction narrative film. For me, with this project specifically, and I have worked on bigger documentaries, but for this one, it really started as kind of a passion project. I was living in Asheville at the time, and I have my own equipment, and I also love the process of creating documentaries. I mean, that's part of the reason that it appeals to me. I love filming. I love meeting new people. I love editing.
Yeah.
And so I for this project, this is not the case for all of them, but for this project, I was kind of the director, the cinematographer, and the editor.
Wow.
And part of it was that it was a small enough project in scope, meaning like a lot of the interviews were done while the artist, Christopher Holt, was sketching the models. And so I could just sit back with my camera and hear their stories. It didn't really demand a big crew. That was part of it. The other part of it, too, was just the project was not intended to be this way from the beginning. Like, it really snowballed. I originally thought, okay, I'll film, maybe 5 times and create a short film that the church can use. And it turned into this, 3.5-year feature film, and every time I thought I was done, I just found another thing that interests me, and I kept filming it. And so I guess I'm just saying that because, depending on the style of documentary, I mean, we're talking ESPN 30 for 30s, which are some of my favorites.
Right.
I mean, those are big-time productions. Those are not one man or one woman band going out there with a camera. Yeah. But this project, for the most part, was. I mean, I was in the community. I could just drive down to the church and film, or drive over to the artist's studio and film when I needed to. The very last shoot was March 5th, 2020. Wow. And I had wanted to get a few more pickup shoots, but the very last shoot was right before everything shut down.
Right.
And so I had a few people helping me edit the film, a few assistant editors kind of collecting, scenes and stuff for me. But then I was just pretty much in my basement for 9 months, and it forced me to edit the whole thing. And I would have probably edited most of it, but it made me the lead editor, whether I liked it or not, being quarantined in my basement. So for a number of reasons. Right? Yeah.
And that tees it up to the next question perfectly, because that's what I was wondering. Like, I think, and I've never been a director in a film, but I assume the typical process of a film would be, we have a script. So let's just say it's a Spider-Man movie. We have our script, and then we go out and get our actors, and then we, do whatever they do to make magic happen. In a documentary, you probably didn't know what would happen on a day-to-day basis because you're filming real life. Yeah. So then you went, and I think you teed this up perfectly. You took all this raw footage, very raw, where, I would think in a typical film, I'm filming Spider-Man running down the street, saving whoever today. You know what I mean? Like, it's scripted.
Yeah. You know what's going to happen from one scene to the next.
Yeah, thank you. And so I assume in a documentary, you don't know what every day is going to bring, and now you have this data. You have all this raw footage, and as you said, you went to your basement. So is that right? And how do you comb through probably hours and hours and hours to tell a story that, unlike the other story where Spider-Man's already scripted, you're very unscripted. You're how do you do that? That's fascinating to me.
Yeah. From the start, I usually am attracted to film ideas that have at least a beginning, middle, and end that I can envision. And so for this one, the painting had to be finished, or it didn't, but it had to have a beginning, middle, and end because of the process of completing the painting. So I know that's really vague.
No, I think it's perfect.
That's still at least some sense of, okay, that's something to hang a narrative on, okay? Right. And then as I start going into it and I'm meeting people who are actually depicted in the painting, that's where it becomes a lot more of, I don't know what I'm going to find out. I don't know who is going to, be more appealing than another person, or where, okay, this person wants to talk to me, I'm going to talk to them, and that leads to a whole nother avenue that I didn't think of. That becomes more of the magic of documentary. And I'm not from a fiction background. Like I said, I was a newspaper reporter, and then I led me into documentary. And part of that appeal to me is the unknown, where I'm going to go film and I'm going to learn things. I'm going to hear from people that I never would have heard from before. And then it's my job to try to piece that footage together in the most coherent, accurate, truthful way. It's a challenging process. It's like the toughest puzzle you've ever done, but also one of the more gratifying puzzles, Yeah. And that's how I view it. I really love that part of it, is sitting down with all this footage. In this case, I probably had 60, 65 hours of footage and getting that down to 1 hour. And that concept is called shooting ratio, how much raw footage you have to what the final product is. And that 60-1, 65-1 is actually not that bad compared to other projects and other things I've worked on. I mean, you look at big time reality shows, something like Deadliest Catch or those types of unscripted content. I mean, you're probably in the thousands to 1 ratio. And so, it's all part of it. And that's why I love it though. It's challenging, but it's really gratifying. So it's hard to really articulate it exactly. I hope that makes some sense.
No, it made perfect sense.
It's all part of the challenge of discovery.
Hey everyone, my name is Cami Pranel and I'm the Executive Director for My Unscripted. We hope you are enjoying today's interview. My Unscripted is dedicated to helping others find their voice, passion, and follow their dreams. Our team can help create websites, apps, YouTube channels, podcasts, media, and social content. Whatever your passion and vision, we can help. Our good friend Manny Ahome of Samaritan's Feet once said, "Make sure your dreams and goals are big enough to create room for others to join you." We've created room for you to join us too. Find out more at myunscripted.com. Now let's join Aaron for the second half of today's interview.
Was there a time in this film or any of your others where it was so hard to not include maybe a certain amount of footage? You know, you're doing your editing and I have to assume you get down to, let's just, for Matt, let's just say there's 10 pieces and you got to cut it to 2. How hard is it to let go of those 8 that that has to be a tough process?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I'm gonna butcher this. I think it's Ernest Hemingway talks about killing your darlings as a writer. Right. It's same thing as an editor, and when you're working on your films, you get really attached to a scene or a character or whatever it might be, and you have to trim that out. And so I think the original runtime of this film, I shouldn't say original, the first full cut of this film was around 90 minutes. Okay. Maybe a little bit longer. And then, you start showing it to people. I immediately showed it to the pastor of this church, Brian Combs. I wanted input from them about, what am I missing here, or what is not coming across? Right. Because that's another big part of this too, is that I'm kind of telling this story as an outsider, and how do I invest the community to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting anything. But, that's tough. I mean, it is difficult in any film. I will say one thing with this film that made it a little bit easier was if you ever go to this church, which I highly recommend, because I can't do justice to the real fresco, in real life. But if you walk into the sanctuary of this church, there's a kiosk at the front, and they have a touch screen where you can touch different elements of the fresco and different people in the fresco and hear their stories. Wow. And so I knew that if scenes that I didn't use, and there were 2 people that I ended up filming with that weren't in the final film, at least they're in the kiosk, and at least they're represented on the church's website. And so it was kind of like a DVD extra.
Yeah. No, that's
right.
Cool.
Like I didn't feel so bad because I knew it at least would live someplace. It wouldn't be totally forgotten. But that's a tough thing with anything. Yeah. I think any artistic process, you always have to kind of cut out things you get really attached to.
Right. Again, you teed it, and again, we're unscripted. We did not have any of these things teed up, but you teed up the next one.
We're on the same wavelength.
That's right. No, you teed up the next question perfectly. There were probably people and stories that resonated with you as you made this film. To your point, I think you had to probably cut some of their story out or someone's story out. And so thankfully they are represented there at the church. How hard was that? Or maybe if not this film, another one, how hard is that when you get to know someone's real story and you get to know the person? How hard? There's probably 2 challenges. One, to make sure that the rest of the world, the viewing audience, myself, when I log into this film and watch it, that I'm feeling what you felt getting to know that person. How do you, 1, represent them? And maybe this is a tough question, but 2, how do you know when to cut off, the coverage or the footage? That's got to be tough to say, okay, so here's this person, let's just say Adam Smith, which is just a fictional name. I get to know Adam. I get to know his story. I want people to know his story. And so that's probably a challenge for you as a film, in the film, to let people know him the way you got to know him. And then 2, not to cut it off too soon. You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, and I think it speaks to why it's so difficult to work in a vacuum.
Right.
I mean, you can't do even this film where I did the majority of the filming and editing. I still have to bring people in to say, hey, does this make sense to you? How is this coming across? Or does this go on for too long? Is this boring? Because you're right. Like, I'm bringing all of my experiences in real life that I had filming a specific scene or a specific person. And I have to remember that a viewer watching the film doesn't have any context outside of the frame.
Right.
There's nothing that they're bringing in other than what I'm showing them on the screen. And so I have to have people kind of pushing back against me as I'm editing this to say, yeah, that doesn't work for me, or this person goes on too long, or this is confusing. That's another big thing, is that I'll hear somebody say something and I'm immediately taken back to when I was filming that. And I know what they mean, but showing that to somebody else, that may not come across. And so, I mean, let me just say this. When I was done, with air quotes here, I know we're a podcast, but done with the edit was probably around late summer, early fall 2000. So let's just say August. It took another 6 months to get it to a point where I felt confident screening it for people. And the first screening, I think, was in April of 2021 at film festivals. But in that 6 months is a process of sending it to people, sitting down with people, other editors who I work with, other directors who I work with, and just taking notes about what worked and what didn't work, what was confusing, what goes on too long. And that's really what helps pull me out of my own personal bias about who I liked or what scene I liked, is hearing it, somebody who has no idea about this story watching this for the first time tell me what they think about it. And that's good and bad. I mean, there's a balance there, but that's the best way to do it, at least from what I've found, because it is really hard to pull yourself away from something where you've been working on it for 3 years,
Perfect. Again, gosh, I swear we're on the same wavelength as you said.
It's in Northeast Ohio.
It must be that Ohio thing. No, so, and I don't consider myself a creative, but I'm in the creative art. Podcasting, I think, are somewhat creative. So, my wife is my biggest fan and my biggest critic. And that's a great thing, and that's a compliment to her. I'm thankful because she's also probably my biggest listener. So, she'll go out and listen to an episode, and then she'll come home and she'll give feedback. And there's times where, so that's my follow-up question is, how have you learned to receive feedback when you're passionate about something? What, like for me, when I'm doing a podcast, I know what I meant to say. Sometimes it's sloppy, it's messy. That's kind of me. That's kind of my shtick, right? That's just who I am. That's why it's unscripted. But maybe something didn't come through on audio the way that I knew it should have, or I felt like it should have, and she'll give that feedback. How have you been able to work and receive feedback and not take it personally?
Yeah, that's so difficult. And I'll also say that my wife is the same way. I mean, I actually don't show her a cut until it's 5 or 6 cuts in, because I know I need to get it really polished to get her first round of feedback. But it's difficult. I mean, you try not to have too much of an ego, but it's tough not to when you put so much of your heart and soul into something. I mean, it's human nature. And so I will say that I try to standardize the process as much as possible. When I show people a cut, I usually have a list of questions or specific items that I want them to comment on. That's not to say I don't welcome general feedback as well, but I really try to kind of steer the conversation in a certain way. And I also try to just shut my mouth. I mean, I think that's probably the one thing that I really try to do is I just listen and nod my head and take notes. And even if I am biting my tongue so much my mouth's bleeding, like if I start talking, then it kind of, I don't want to create a chilling effect for them where they feel like, oh, he's being defensive, even though in my heart, I'm really, I feel it. But I think that that's a big thing too, is that no matter how frustrating it might be, just being quiet and letting people talk and taking notes. And then at the end, you look at all the notes, and there's always going to be outliers and there's going to be conflicting notes, but trying to make sense of that, that's a skill unto itself, understanding what feedback's valid and which feedback to throw out. But I don't know. I'm certainly still learning and growing with this. Every time I make a new film, the best way to receive feedback. But I think being quiet is probably a universal tip that I would say in any feedback session. Just let it play out. Know that it's going to be painful. Let it flow over you, and then make heads or tails of it afterward. And
I could tell you that I think it was last week or maybe the week before, she gave some feedback, and my response was not positive, and I later apologized and just said, I'm sorry. Because I think, we just take it personal. It's our baby, it's our thing, So, but I'm thankful for the feedback. So, one last question, was there a particular person, in this, because there's several stories, as you mentioned, that had to be really draw you in. Was there one particular that you want to highlight?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about a guy named Jerry, who is actually the very last model featured in the film. Jerry's been in and out of jail many times. He's been homeless for many years. He is in housing now, but he has a long history of substance abuse and homelessness, and so he's always been around the church. And he would be watching Christopher the artist doing his artwork, and initially he was skeptical about being in the fresco, not even the film, just the fresco. And it took a long time for the artist Christopher to kind of gain the trust and convince him to do it. It was the same way with the film. It took him an even longer time to agree to do the film. And part of the process of making this film was just going to the church without a camera and just talking to people and trying to gain trust. And, a big part of documentary filmmaking is just interpersonal relationships. Right. Making people feel comfortable. And with Jerry, it was definitely that. And one day he just said, all right, let's film today. All right, well, let's do it. Right. And so that's what we did. And it was a really powerful interview, and his story is heartbreaking. And I felt honored that he shared it in such an honest and authentic way. And so that scene is pretty powerful in the film. It was also a pretty challenging one to capture in general. It took months and months to convince him to talk. But the cool part was, after he talked, I think he felt kind of empowered by sharing his story. And so, he would come back into the church when I'd be filming, and he would, give me tips on the camera and what he thought I should be filming. Great. And he came around a lot after the fresco was completed. And so I think that, going back to what we talked about earlier, the power of seeing yourself in a mural, right. The power of seeing yourself in a way you've never thought of yourself as. Yeah. I think that was transformational for Jerry, both with the fresco and the film. And so that's a pretty cool scene and a pretty cool experience for making the film.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So let's talk specifically about the film, because you've given me much more than I think I probably even asked or even imagined that this interview could be. And I've been fascinated. Sure. Hopefully our audience is. Cool. But for the audience, why we really got on here, Theirs is the Kingdom. I don't even know if we've mentioned it. Theirs is the Kingdom is the name of the film. Where can this audience, where will this be distributed? How can I watch the film?
Sure. So you could watch it on iTunes, on Google Play. I don't know when this podcast will come out, but it's going to be broadcast on the World Channel on Easter. Okay. And that covers about 75% of the U.S. And it's also available on pbs.org to stream it there. That's until May 1st. And so depending on when you're listening to this podcast, it's going to be available in a number of different places. It's also being broadcast on PBS stations all over the country. So I would say, check your local listings. But if you go to theirsisthe.kingdomfilm.com, I have links to all those places there. By May, it'll probably be available on more streaming services too. But right now it's Google and Apple. And so it'll be available on the big ones. It'll be easy to find. But if you have any questions, just go to the website. Also on our Instagram page, which is just at Theirs is the Kingdom. We post a lot of the updates and things on that page too. And if you are, part of an organization, faith-based or otherwise, I mean, we've done a number of community screenings with organizations that work with these types of populations, homeless, mental illness, addiction, and we've done screenings with them. We've also done screenings at a number of individual churches and congregations. If you're interested in doing something like that, maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're a part of one of those organizations. If you go to our website, there's a form there to fill out to host a screening. We have a discussion guide that kind of travels with the film as well. And so that's kind of the big focus this year is more community-based grassroots screenings and then getting the film out on a wider scale, both on TV and on digital streaming.
I love it. So anybody listening, please support, however that is. And I suppose by watching the film, that supports you, correct?
Yeah, especially with the streaming platforms, that helps. Okay. And so, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And is there any other way that we can support? I know you mentioned the community screening. Are there other ways if someone watches the film, doesn't watch the film, just has listened to this interview, is there ways that we can support you and what you're doing?
Well, I mean, I will say a goal for this film is to kind of shine a light on the work of Haywood Street, okay. The church in Asheville. Whether you're a person of faith or not, I think what they're doing in terms of how they are responding to the homeless community in Asheville is a model for a number of cities in the United States. And so, if you ever find yourself in Asheville, there's a lot of great restaurants and breweries there, a lot of good reasons to go there. I would encourage you to go see the fresco, go to Haywood Street and see it, because I think that's a point of impact, I think, from the film that I would like to see. But for me personally, I mean, no, just follow the page on Instagram, keep up to date with the film. If you like the film, share it with your friends. I mean, it's one of the struggles of as an independent filmmaker is kind of getting the word out about a project. Yeah. And so I think the biggest way to support would be just sharing about the film if you liked it and help spreading the word.
Perfect. And I'll have all the links that at least the ones I can link in this blog post with our episode as well. So go to myunscripted.com/podcast and find this interview, and you'll find those links in there as well. But man, thank you so much for your time. I know we may have gone different directions than just talking about the film, but I think it's been fascinating, and I love hearing your passion. I mean, I think that's most people that listen to Unscripted, and I often am preaching to myself when I say it, is, we have to find our value and what, for me, what God created us to do. And it sounds like that God put you at an intersection here with a time and a place for a reason. And those stories that are memorials on that wall are always going to be there, but so were your memories. And now you have a film to also have that. So, man, this has been really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing with the audience.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I love talking about this, not just my film, but just the art of documentary filmmaking in general. So I appreciated the direction of the interview.
Awesome. Well, if you make it back to Ohio, lunch is on me.
Cool. All right. I'll take you up on that.
All right. Last time, the film, they can find that on all the streaming platforms. The name of the film is Theirs is the Kingdom documentary, and it can be found on most of the streaming platforms, PBS, and then again, the links will be in my post and on Instagram. One more time, what's the Instagram?
Theirs is the Kingdom.
Theirs is the Kingdom. There's TH. My spelling's not so good. THEIRS is the Kingdom, and that's on Instagram, correct?
Yep, on Instagram, on there'sthekingdomfilm.com. Yep.
Is there a Facebook page?
There is, actually. I should start saying that because that's a newer thing that we just launched. But there is a Facebook page. If you just look for Theirs is the Kingdom documentary on Facebook, it'll pop up. But I need to find the exact.
So search Facebook. You're good. I caught you with it.
That's right.
Theirs is the Kingdom. Theirs is the Kingdom on Instagram and Facebook. Most of your streaming services. The links will be in this post. Thank you so much, my friend. This has been wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for your time and your insight into creating a documentary and just being a creative in general. And I promise I'll give good feedback.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
No, all good. Appreciate you. Happy Easter to you, my friend. And I know if
well.
people hear it after Easter, hope you had a great Easter. So thanks so much, man. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks,
All
man.
right.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Unscripted Podcast with your host, Aaron Conrad. Make sure to like, share, follow, and review on your favorite podcast platforms. Also, make sure to check out my song Great and Mighty One on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you find your music. We'll see you next time on Unscripted with Aaron Conrad.